Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls in her small Texas town. While her classmates spent their afternoons gossiping about boys and planning weekend parties, Sarah could be found at the local gym, pushing herself through grueling workout routines that would make grown men wince. Her arms, lean and muscular from years of dedication, bore the evidence of her commitment to something bigger than the ordinary life everyone expected her to live. The tattoo had been her 18th birthday gift to herself, not the delicate butterfly or inspirational quote that most girls her age might choose, but something that spoke to her soul and her aspirations. Wrapped around her left forearm in bold, black ink was an intricate design featuring an eagle soaring above turbulent waves, with the words "Courage Under Fire" scripted beneath in elegant lettering. To Sarah, it represented everything she hoped to become: fearless, strong, and unbreakable. But to everyone else in Millbrook, Texas, it was just another reason to whisper and point. Sarah worked the morning shift at Danny's Diner, the kind of place where the same group of locals gathered every day to solve the world's problems over coffee that had been brewing since dawn. She had taken the job to save money for what came next, though she kept those plans to herself. The less people knew about her dreams, the less they could crush them with their doubt and negativity. "Hey, tough girl," called out Jake Morrison from his usual booth by the window. He was 25, worked construction when he felt like it, and considered himself the town's unofficial comedian. His voice carried that particular brand of mockery that made Sarah's jaw clench involuntarily. "Planning to join the circus with that thing on your arm?" His buddies erupted in laughter, the kind that echoed through the small diner and made other customers turn to see what was so amusing. Sarah continued wiping down the counter, her movement steady and controlled, even as heat crept up her neck. "Maybe she thinks she's some kind of soldier," added Tommy Chun, Jake's sidekick who never seemed to have an original thought of his own. "Look at those muscles. Bet she could take down a whole platoon of enemies." More laughter followed, each chuckle feeling like a small knife in Sarah's back. Mrs. Henderson, who had been Sarah's third-grade teacher and still treated her like a child, looked up from her morning crossword puzzle with a disapproving frown. "Sarah, dear, I've been meaning to talk to you about that marking on your arm. It's so aggressive. What will people think when you're trying to find a nice young man to settle down with? Men don't like women who look like they could break them in half." Sarah's hand tightened around the dish rag, but she kept her voice level. "I'm not looking to settle down, Mrs. Henderson. I have other plans." "Oh, sweetie." Mrs. Henderson's voice dripped with the kind of condescending sympathy that made Sarah want to scream. "We all have dreams when we're young, but reality has a way of catching up with us. You're a pretty girl under all that intensity. Why don't you focus on finding a good job at the bank or maybe the school district? Something respectable." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the morning rush, if you could call the handful of people who wandered in before 9 a rush. Sarah threw herself into taking orders and serving coffee, grateful for the distraction. But the comments continued throughout her shift, a steady stream of jokes and unwanted advice that followed her from table to table. "Sarah's going to save the world with those biceps," laughed Carol from the beauty salon. "Maybe she can arm wrestle the bad guys into submission." "I heard she runs 5 miles every morning before work," whispered Betty to her friend, loud enough for Sarah to hear. "What's she training for? The Olympics?" This is Millbrook, not some big city where girls think they can do men's jobs. By noon, Sarah felt like she was drowning in other people's expectations and limitations. She had heard every variation of the same theme, that she was wasting her time, that her dreams were unrealistic, that she should accept her place in the natural order of things. The tattoo, which had once filled her with pride and determination, now felt like a target painted on her skin. During her lunch break, Sarah escaped to the small park behind the diner. She sat on the old wooden bench where she used to read as a child, back when the world seemed full of infinite possibilities. Now, at 18, those possibilities felt like they were shrinking with each passing day. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Your aunt called. Said people are talking about your tattoo at church. Maybe we should look into getting it removed? We can find the money somehow." Sarah stared at the message until her vision blurred. Even her own family was embarrassed by her choices. They meant well, she knew that. They were trying to protect her from disappointment and social rejection. But their protection felt like a prison, and their love came with conditions that required her to be smaller, quieter, more acceptable. She thought about the recruiter she had met 2 months ago at the community college job fair. Staff Sergeant Williams had been setting up a table for military recruitment, and something about her bearing and confidence had drawn Sarah like a magnet. They had talked for over an hour about service, sacrifice, and the kind of challenges that would either break a person or forge them into something stronger. The military isn't just about physical strength, Staff Sergeant Williams had explained, her eyes taking in Sarah's athletic build and focused demeanor. It's about mental toughness, leadership under pressure, and the ability to adapt and overcome. From what I can see, you have the potential for something special, but it won't be easy, and not everyone will understand your choice. Sarah had left that conversation with a stack of brochures and a heart full of possibility. But she had also left with strict instructions to keep her intentions private until she was absolutely certain. Military recruiters had seen too many promising candidates derailed by family pressure and community expectations. Now, sitting in the park with her mother's text glowing on her phone screen, Sarah felt the weight of those expectations pressing down on her chest like a physical force. Part of her wanted to give in, to delete the recruiter's number and accept the life that everyone else had planned for her. It would be so much easier to blend in, to stop fighting against the current of other people's opinions. But then, she looked down at her tattoo, at the eagle's fierce eyes and outstretched wings. She had chosen this design not just for its beauty, but for what it represented. Eagles didn't apologize for their strength. They didn't make themselves smaller to fit into spaces designed for sparrows. They soared above the storm, using the very winds that threatened to destroy them as the force that carried them higher. Sarah's phone buzzed again, this time with a call from an unknown number. For a moment, she considered letting it go to voicemail. But something made her answer. "Is this Sarah Martinez?" The voice was crisp, professional, unmistakably military. "Yes, this is Sarah. This is Staff Sergeant Williams. We spoke a few months ago about your interest in military service. I wanted to follow up and see if you're still considering your options. We have some new programs opening up that I think might interest you." Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. She had filled out preliminary paperwork, but hadn't heard anything back. She had begun to wonder if she had imagined the recruiter's enthusiasm, if her dreams were just as unrealistic as everyone said. "I'm definitely still interested," Sarah said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "What kind of programs are you talking about?" "Well, I can't go into details over the phone, but I will say this. The Navy has been expanding opportunities for women in combat roles. Your test scores and physical fitness evaluations put you in a very select category. If you're serious about this path, I'd like to set up a meeting to discuss some options that most people never even hear about." Sarah's pulse quickened. She knew what the sergeant was hinting at without saying it directly. The Navy SEALs had recently opened their doors to women, though the selection process was so brutal that very few even attempted it, and fewer still succeeded. It was the kind of opportunity that existed only in her wildest dreams. "I'm very serious," Sarah replied, her voice growing stronger with each word. "When can we meet?" They arranged to meet the following week at a location an hour outside of town, away from prying eyes and wagging tongues. As Sarah hung up the phone, she felt something shift inside her chest. The weight of other people's expectations was still there, but it no longer felt crushing. Instead, it felt like ballast, something that would keep her grounded and focused as she prepared for the storm ahead. She returned to work with a new sense of purpose, though she was careful not to let it show. The afternoon brought the usual crowd of regulars, and, with them, the usual comments about her appearance and life choices. But now their words bounced off her like rain off a windshield. "Still planning to save the world, Sarah?" Jake Morrison called out as she refilled his coffee. Sarah looked him straight in the eye, her smile genuine for the first time all day. "Something like that," she said simply. Tommy Chin leaned forward conspiratorially. "Come on, what's the big secret? What are you really training for?" "The UFC. I'm training to be the best version of myself," Sarah replied, moving on to the next table before he could respond. As her shift ended, Sarah realized that this was probably one of the last times she would endure their mockery with patience. Soon, she would be gone from this place, pursuing something that would test every limit she thought she had and push her beyond them. The people in this diner had no idea what she was capable of, and she was beginning to understand that their limitations said more about them than about her. Walking home past the old courthouse and the faded storefronts that had defined her world for 18 years, Sarah felt like she was seeing everything through new eyes. This town would always be part of her story, but it didn't have to be the end of her story. In fact, she was beginning to suspect that her story was just getting started. That night, she stood in front of her bedroom mirror and really looked at her tattoo for the first time in weeks. The black ink had healed perfectly, and the design was even more striking than she remembered. The eagle's wings seemed to stretch beyond the boundaries of her skin, as if ready to carry her toward whatever came next. Tomorrow she would wake up early and run her 5 miles, pushing herself harder than ever before. She would return to the diner and endure another day of comments and criticism. But she would do it all with the knowledge that she was no longer trapped by other people's small dreams and smaller minds. She was going to fly, whether they understood it or not. And when she did, that tattoo would be right there with her, a permanent reminder that she had never apologized for wanting something more than the life everyone else thought she deserved. The eagle soared above the storm, just as she would soar above theirs. The meeting with Staff Sergeant Williams took place in a nondescript office building an hour's drive from Millbrook. Sarah had told her parents she was visiting a friend from high school, a lie that sat uncomfortably in her stomach but felt necessary. They would find out soon enough about her decision, but first she needed to know exactly what she was choosing. The office was sparse and professional, with motivational posters featuring service members in various challenging scenarios. Staff Sergeant Williams looked exactly as Sarah remembered, composed, confident, and radiating the kind of quiet strength that comes from facing real adversity and emerging victorious. "I'm glad you came," Williams said, gesturing for Sarah to take a seat across from her desk. "Before we begin, I need to make something clear. What we're about to discuss is not for everyone. In fact, it's not for most people. The failure rate is extraordinary, and even those who succeed are forever changed by the experience. Are you prepared to hear about something that will either make you stronger than you ever imagined possible or break you completely?" Sarah felt her mouth go dry, but she nodded without hesitation. "I'm prepared." Williams opened a folder and pulled out several documents. The Navy's Special Warfare community has opened all positions to qualified candidates regardless of gender. This includes basic underwater demolition/SEAL training, BUD/S. The physical and mental standards are identical for all candidates. There are no modifications, no allowances, and no second chances. You either meet the standard or you don't. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah had researched the SEALs extensively, reading everything she could find about their training and selection process. She knew that the majority of candidates, all of them previously successful military personnel, failed to complete the program. She also knew that no woman had yet succeeded in earning the SEAL Trident, though a few had attempted the training. "What does that mean for me, specifically?" Sarah asked. Williams leaned forward, her expression serious. "It means that if you choose this path, you'll be under a microscope from day one. Every instructor, every fellow candidate, every person in the chain of command will be watching to see if you can hack it. Some will be rooting for you to succeed. Others will be waiting for you to fail, so they can say they knew all along that women don't belong in special operations." Sarah thought about the comments she endured daily at the diner, the way people looked at her tattoo, and made assumptions about her capabilities. The idea of facing that scrutiny on a much larger and more intense scale should have been terrifying. Instead, she found it oddly comforting. At least in the military, the standards would be clear and objective. Success or failure would be based on performance, not on other people's preconceived notions about what she should or shouldn't be able to do. "What would I need to do to qualify?" she asked. Williams smiled for the first time since Sarah had arrived. "The fact that you're asking, 'What do I need to do?' instead of, 'Do you think I can do it?' tells me a lot about your mindset. That's exactly the kind of attitude that might, and I emphasize might, see you through this process." Over the next 2 hours, Williams outlined the path ahead. First, Sarah would need to complete basic naval training, which would be challenging but manageable given her fitness level and mental preparation. Then would come the real test, BUD/S, a 6-month crucible that would push her beyond every limit she thought she had. The training was divided into 3 phases. First phase focused on physical conditioning, with the infamous Hell Week serving as the ultimate test of determination and mental toughness. Candidates would be pushed to their absolute breaking point through sleep deprivation, constant physical activity, and psychological pressure designed to identify those who would never quit, no matter what. Second phase would introduce combat diving, teaching candidates to operate underwater in conditions that would paralyze most people with fear. They would learn to navigate in complete darkness, handle equipment failures that could mean the difference between life and death, and maintain their composure when everything around them was going wrong. Third phase would cover land warfare, weapons training, and small unit tactics. By the time candidates reached this point, they would already be part of an elite group. But the standards would only get higher, and the margin for error would shrink with each passing week. The physical requirements are published and non-negotiable, Williams explained, sliding a sheet of paper across the desk. But I'll tell you something that's not written down anywhere. The physical standards are just the entry fee. What really determines success or failure is what happens in your head when everything hurts, when you're exhausted beyond anything you've ever experienced, and when every instinct in your body is telling you to quit. Sarah studied the numbers, the minimum scores for push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, and running times. They were intimidating, but not impossible. She was already close to meeting several of the standards, and, with focused training, she could exceed them all. When would I start? She asked. If you're serious about this path, you could ship out for basic training in 3 months. That gives you time to get your affairs in order and to prepare both physically and mentally for what's ahead. But, Sarah, Williams paused, her expression growing even more serious. I need you to understand that once you start this journey, there's no going back to your old life. Even if you don't make it through BUD/S, and, statistically, you probably won't. You'll never be the same person who walked out of that diner in Millbrook, Texas. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine, but it wasn't fear. It was anticipation. The person who worked at Danny's diner felt small and confined, like she was living someone else's life. The person Williams was describing sounded like someone she actually wanted to become. I understand, Sarah said. What do I need to do next? Williams handed her a thick packet of paperwork. Take this home and read every word carefully. If you decide to move forward, we'll schedule your initial processing and medical examinations. But don't make this decision lightly, and don't make it alone. Talk to your family. Think about what you're giving up as well as what you might gain. The drive home felt longer than usual. Sarah's mind was racing with possibilities and fears, dreams, and doubts. By the time she pulled into her family's driveway, she had made her decision. The paperwork in the passenger seat represented more than just a career change. It was a chance to discover who she really was when everything comfortable and familiar was stripped away. Her parents were waiting in the living room when she walked through the door. Her mother's red-rimmed eyes told Sarah everything she needed to know before anyone spoke a word. Mrs. Chin called, her father said quietly. She saw you leaving town this morning and got curious. Made some phone calls. Found out about your meeting with a military recruiter. Sarah set the paperwork down on the coffee table and took a deep breath. I was going to tell you tonight. Her mother stood up abruptly, her hands shaking. Tell us what exactly? That you're throwing your life away on some fantasy about becoming a soldier? Sarah, honey, you're 18 years old. You don't understand what you're giving up. I understand exactly what I'm giving up, Sarah replied, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. I'm giving up a life that doesn't fit me, in a place where everyone has already decided who I'm supposed to be and what I'm supposed to want. Her father, usually the calm mediator in family discussions, looked older than she had ever seen him. Sarah, we're not trying to hold you back. We're trying to protect you from making a mistake that will follow you for the rest of your life. The military is dangerous. And this special forces thing, that's not meant for people like us. People like us? Sarah felt her temper flare. What does that mean exactly? It means we're ordinary people from an ordinary town, her mother said, tears starting to flow freely. We don't come from military families. We don't have connections or advantages. You'll be completely alone, surrounded by people who are different from you in every way that matters. Sarah looked at her parents, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time in her life. They weren't bad people. They were loving, well-intentioned, and genuinely worried about her welfare. But they were also limited by their own fears and experiences. They had never dreamed big enough to understand why she would need to dream at all. You're right, Sarah said finally. I will be alone. I will be different from almost everyone around me. And it will be dangerous and difficult and probably the hardest thing I'll ever do in my life. But, Mom, Dad, look at me. Really look at me. Do I seem happy living the life you want me to live? Her parents exchanged a look that spoke volumes. They had seen her restlessness, her constant need to push herself physically, her inability to settle into the patterns that satisfied other young women their age. They had attributed it to typical teenage rebellion, assuming she would eventually grow out of it and embrace a more conventional path. We just want you to be safe, her mother whispered. I know you do, but safe isn't enough for me. I need to find out what I'm capable of, even if it means risking everything to do it. The conversation continued long into the night, covering the same ground again and again. Her parents presented every argument they could think of: the low probability of success, the physical danger, the social isolation, the unknown challenges ahead. Sarah listened respectfully to each concern, acknowledging their validity while explaining why none of them changed her fundamental decision. By morning, they had reached an exhausted stalemate. Her parents remained opposed to her choice, but they could see that her mind was made up. Sarah spent the next week working her final shifts at the diner, enduring a new level of commentary as word of her military aspirations spread through the small town's efficient gossip network. "So it's true then?" Jake Morrison asked on her last day, his usual mockery replaced by something that might have been genuine curiosity. "You're really going to try to become some kind of Navy superhero?" Sarah finished wiping down his table and met his eyes directly. "I'm going to find out what I'm made of. Maybe you should try it sometime." Jake's face reddened, but for once he didn't have a comeback ready. Sarah walked away feeling lighter than she had in months. Soon, very soon, she would be surrounded by people who understood the difference between dreaming and doing. The farewell dinner her parents organized was a subdued affair, attended by relatives who alternated between expressing concern for her safety and admiration for her courage. Sarah's aunt pulled her aside after dessert. "You know, I was about your age when I wanted to move to New York and try to make it as an artist," she said quietly. "My family talked me out of it. Said it was too risky, too impractical. I've always wondered what might have happened if I had been brave enough to try anyway." Sarah hugged her aunt tightly, understanding that this conversation was as much for the older woman as it was for her. It's never too late to find out what you're capable of. Maybe not. But it's easier when you're 18 and bulletproof. Her aunt smiled sadly. "Promise me something. When you're out there proving all the doubters wrong, remember that some of us believed in you from the beginning." 3 weeks later, Sarah stood at the bus station with a single duffel bag containing everything she owned that mattered. Her parents had driven her there in silence, their goodbye more sorrowful than celebratory. But as the bus pulled away from Millbrook, Sarah felt nothing but anticipation for what lay ahead. She looked down at her tattoo one more time, running her finger over the eagle's outstretched wings. Soon, she would discover whether she had the strength to soar as high as she had always dreamed, or whether she would crash and burn trying. Either way, she would never again wonder what might have been if she had been brave enough to find out. Basic training at Great Lakes Naval Station was everything Sarah had expected and nothing like she had imagined. The physical challenges were manageable. Her years of self-imposed discipline had prepared her body for the demands of military conditioning. What she hadn't anticipated was the psychological adjustment of living in a world where every decision, from when to wake up to how to fold her clothes, was made by someone else. The other recruits came from backgrounds as diverse as America itself. There was Jennifer from Manhattan, whose father was a Wall Street banker and who had never been camping in her life. Marcus from rural Alabama spoke in a drawl so thick that Sarah sometimes had to ask him to repeat himself. Lisa from Los Angeles had joined the Navy to escape an abusive relationship and see the world beyond her neighborhood's limitations. What united them all was the shared experience of being transformed from civilians into sailors. Day by day, hour by hour, they learned to think differently, move differently, and respond to challenges as a unit rather than as individuals. Sarah found herself adapting quickly to the structured environment, though she was careful not to stand out too much. She had learned from Staff Sergeant Williams that exceptional performance could attract unwanted attention at this stage. Her tattoo drew curious glances from other recruits, but the questions were different here. Instead of mockery, she encountered respect and interest. These were people who had also chosen to chase something bigger than the ordinary life, and they recognized a kindred spirit when they saw one. "That's some serious ink," commented Rodriguez, a fellow recruit from Phoenix who was planning to go into aviation after basic training. "What's the story?" "It's a reminder," Sarah replied simply. "Sometimes you need to soar above the storm." Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "I can respect that. Where are you headed after this?" Sarah had practiced this answer carefully. "Special warfare. Going to see if I can make the cut." Rodriguez's eyes widened slightly. He had heard about the Navy's decision to open all positions to qualified candidates, but Sarah was the first woman he had encountered who was actually attempting the path to the teams. "That's hardcore," he said with genuine admiration. "I've met some SEALs before. They're a different breed entirely. You really think you can handle that level of intensity?" "I guess I'll find out," Sarah replied, appreciating that his question came from curiosity rather than skepticism. Word of Sarah's intentions spread quietly through their training company. She found herself under subtle observation from both fellow recruits and instructors, though no one made her feel like a spectacle. If anything, she detected a sense of pride among her classmates that one of their own was attempting something so challenging. Chief Petty Officer Morrison, their lead instructor, pulled Sarah aside during the final week of training. Despite sharing a last name with the tormentor from her hometown, this Morrison was a completely different breed of person. 20 years in the Navy had given him the bearing of someone who had seen everything and been impressed by very little. Martinez, I've been watching your performance throughout training. Your scores are solid across the board, your leadership potential is evident, and your attitude is exactly what we look for in special warfare candidates. But I want to make sure you understand what you're walking into. Sarah stood at attention, waiting for him to continue. Bud/S has an attrition rate of over 80%. That means 8 out of 10 people who start the program will ring the bell and quit before they finish. These aren't weak people we're talking about. These are already successful military personnel who have demonstrated exceptional physical and mental capabilities, and they still wash out in massive numbers. Morrison began walking slowly around Sarah as he spoke, a habit she had noticed whenever he was making a particularly important point. As a woman attempting this program, you'll face additional challenges that have nothing to do with the official standards. Some instructors will push you harder to prove you don't belong. Some of your fellow candidates will resent your presence. Some will assume you're getting special treatment even when you're held to identical standards. How you handle that pressure will determine your success or failure more than your physical capabilities. Sarah maintained her attention position, but her mind was racing. She had expected physical challenges and mental toughness requirements. The social dynamics Morrison was describing added another layer of complexity that she would need to navigate carefully. Do you have any advice for handling those situations, Chief? She asked. Morrison stopped in front of her and smiled for the first time in their conversation. Yeah, outperform everyone around you so consistently that they have no choice but to respect your presence. Don't just meet the standard, exceed it by so much that your critics look foolish. And when someone tries to break you down because you're different, remember that they're revealing their own limitations, not yours. 3 weeks later, Sarah found herself standing on the beach at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, looking out at the Pacific Ocean that would become both her greatest challenge and her most intimate adversary over the next 6 months. The other BUD/S candidates around her represented the cream of the military crop: Rangers, Marines, Navy personnel who had already distinguished themselves in their respective fields. Class 347 started with 162 candidates. By the end of the first week, that number had dropped to 145. Sarah watched 17 people she had trained and eaten meals with simply disappear, their decision to quit removing them from the program as completely as if they had never existed. The physical training was relentless and progressively more demanding. 4-mile runs on soft sand that left her legs burning. Ocean swims in water cold enough to steal her breath and make her muscles seize. Obstacle courses that required perfect technique and maximum effort just to complete within the time limits. But it was the mental pressure that truly separated those who would continue from those who would ring the bell. The instructors were masters of psychological warfare, experts at finding each candidate's breaking point and pushing them beyond it. They could identify weakness like sharks sensing blood in the water, and they attacked it with surgical precision. Martinez, Instructor Chief Williams, no relation to Staff Sergeant Williams, barked during the second week of training. You think you're special because you're the only woman in this class. Sarah was in the middle of a set of push-ups, her muscles already trembling from the previous hour of exercises. No, Instructor Chief. You think the enemy is going to go easy on you because you're a girl? No, Instructor Chief. Then, why are you holding back? I can see you've got more in the tank, but you're pacing yourself like you're running a marathon instead of fighting for your life. Williams was right, and Sarah knew it. She had been unconsciously moderating her effort, trying to conserve energy for the challenges ahead. But that strategy was exactly the kind of thinking that would get her killed in a real combat situation. Give me 20 more push-ups, and this time I want to see what you're really made of. Sarah dug deeper than she ever had before, finding reserves of strength she didn't know existed. When she finished the additional push-ups, Williams nodded approvingly. That's better. But understand this. If you hold anything back in my program, you're not just cheating yourself. You're cheating every person who might someday depend on you to bring them home alive. The lesson was clear, and Sarah took it to heart. From that moment forward, she attacked every challenge with complete commitment, regardless of the cost to her comfort or energy reserves. She discovered that her body was capable of far more than she had ever demanded of it, and her mind was stronger than she had ever tested. Hell Week arrived like a hurricane that everyone could see coming but no one could fully prepare for. 5.5 days of constant activity, maximum 4 hours of sleep total, and physical challenges that pushed every candidate to their absolute limit and beyond. Sarah had read about Hell Week extensively, but experiencing it was like the difference between looking at a photograph of a fire and actually being burned. The combination of sleep deprivation, hypothermia, and relentless physical demands created a unique form of suffering that couldn't be understood intellectually. By the third day, she was hallucinating regularly. Fellow candidates began to look like people from her past, and she found herself having conversations with instructors who weren't actually there. Her body moved through the motions of each evolution automatically, her conscious mind floating somewhere above the action like an observer watching someone else's suffering. It was during a particularly brutal surf passage exercise that Sarah experienced what she would later recognize as her defining moment. The candidates were required to link arms and march into the frigid Pacific, then lie down in the surf and allow the waves to crash over them for an extended period. The combination of cold water and constant motion was designed to induce hypothermia and panic. Lying in the sand with waves breaking over her body, Sarah felt her grip on consciousness beginning to slip. Her core temperature was dropping dangerously low, and her body was shutting down non-essential functions to preserve vital organs. For a moment, she understood with perfect clarity why so many people rang the bell during Hell Week. She could almost see herself getting up, walking to the bell, and bringing an end to the suffering with 3 simple pulls on a rope. The temptation was so powerful it felt like gravity, pulling her toward the easy solution to an impossible situation. But then, she looked at her tattoo, now barely visible under layers of sand and salt residue. The eagle was still there, still soaring above the storm. In that moment of crisis, she remembered not just her own dreams, but all the people who had told her those dreams were impossible. Jake Morrison laughing at her ambitions. Mrs. Henderson telling her to find a nice boy and settle down. Her own parents suggesting she should want less from life. Sarah realized that quitting now wouldn't just mean failing to become a SEAL. It would mean proving right every person who had ever told her she wasn't capable of extraordinary things. It would mean returning to a life of other people's limitations and accepted mediocrity. The thought of facing those same people with the knowledge that she had quit when things got difficult was more unbearable than any physical discomfort. She would rather die in this surf than go back to serving coffee to people who had never risked anything meaningful in their entire lives. When the exercise finally ended and the candidates were allowed to stand, Sarah was still there. She was hypothermic, exhausted beyond rational thought, and pushed far beyond anything she had previously believed possible. But she was still there. That night, as she lay in her rack trying to steal a few hours of sleep before the next day's challenges, Sarah felt something fundamental shift in her understanding of herself. She had always been tough, always been determined. But she had never before tested those qualities against something that could actually break her. Now she knew with absolute certainty that she possessed something rare and valuable, the ability to continue functioning when every instinct in her body was screaming for her to stop. It was a discovery that would serve her well in the challenges ahead, both in training and in the operational environment where Liz would depend on her ability to perform under pressure. Hell Week claimed 37 more candidates from Class 347. Sarah watched people she respected and admired simply reach their breaking point and walk away. Some left with tears, others with relief, but all with the understanding that they had discovered their limit. Sarah had discovered something different. She had found that her limits were not where she had previously believed them to be, and that with enough motivation and the right mindset, those boundaries could be pushed much further than seemed humanly possible. When Hell Week finally ended, the surviving candidates looked like refugees from some natural disaster. They were covered in sand, salt, and exhaustion that had soaked into their bones. But they were also united by the shared knowledge that they had refused to quit when quitting was the only rational choice. As Sarah stood on the beach watching the sun rise over the Pacific, she thought about the people back in Millbrook who were probably just starting their morning routines. They would wake up in warm, comfortable beds, shower in hot water, and spend their day engaged in familiar, safe activities. She wouldn't trade places with any of them for anything in the world. The weeks following Hell Week brought their own unique challenges. While the physical abuse was slightly less intense, the technical demands increased exponentially. Second phase introduced combat diving, a skill set that would either become second nature or eliminate candidates who couldn't adapt to operating in an environment where humans were never meant to survive. Sarah's first time breathing underwater from diving equipment was a moment of profound disorientation. Every instinct developed over 18 years of land-based existence screamed that what she was doing was fundamentally wrong and dangerous. The regulator in her mouth felt foreign and unreliable, and the weight of water pressing against her body created a sensation of claustrophobia that threatened to trigger panic. But panic was not an option in the SEAL program. Panic got people killed, and people who panicked got their teammates killed. So Sarah forced herself to breathe slowly and steadily, focusing on the mechanical process of inhalation and exhalation rather than on her brain's conviction that she was drowning. Instructor Chief Patterson, a 20-year veteran of naval special warfare, had seen hundreds of candidates struggle with this transition. His job was to identify those who could overcome their natural fear and develop the mental discipline necessary for underwater operations. Martinez, he called out during a pool exercise designed to test candidates' composure under stress. Your breathing pattern tells me you're fighting the equipment instead of working with it. In a real-world scenario, that kind of tension will burn through your air supply and put your entire team at risk. Sarah was 30 feet underwater, wearing full diving gear and attempting to navigate an obstacle course that required precise buoyancy control and efficient movement. Her air consumption was indeed higher than it should have been, a clear indicator of stress and inefficient technique. Relax your shoulders. Patterson's voice came through the underwater communication system. Stop fighting the water and let it support you. You're not sinking, you're flying in a different medium. The adjustment required a fundamental shift in Sarah's thinking. Instead of treating the water as an enemy to be conquered, she needed to embrace it as a natural environment where she could operate effectively. The change didn't happen immediately, but over the course of several weeks, she began to feel genuinely comfortable underwater. Her improvement was noted by the instructing staff, but it also attracted attention from some of her fellow candidates. 23 people remained from the original class of 162, and the competitive pressure among the survivors was intense. Everyone knew that not all of them would make it to graduation, and each person's success was viewed by some as coming at the expense of others. Looks like the princess is finally figuring out how to swim, muttered Petty Officer Jackson during a break between exercises. He was a former Marine who had made no secret of his belief that women had no place in special operations, regardless of what the politicians and administrators might say. Sarah had learned to ignore Jackson's comments for the most part, but other candidates were beginning to take notice of his increasingly vocal criticism. The situation came to a head during a particularly challenging exercise that required buddy teams to share air while navigating underwater obstacles. Sarah was partnered with Petty Officer Thompson, a quiet professional from Tennessee who had proven himself to be both competent and reliable. They had successfully completed the first half of the exercise when Jackson's voice crackled through the communication system. Thompson, you sure you want to trust your life to someone who probably can't even bench press her own body weight? The comment was a violation of training protocols that required candidates to maintain focus on the mission rather than on personal grievances. But it was also strategically timed to occur during a critical phase of the exercise when any distraction could lead to dangerous complications. Sarah felt her jaw clench, but she forced herself to maintain her breathing pattern and continue with the exercise. Thompson, however, was not willing to let the comment pass without response. Jackson, shut your mouth and focus on your own performance. Martinez has proven herself every day we've been here, which is more than I can say for some people. The exchange might have escalated further, but Instructor Chief Patterson's voice cut through the water with unmistakable authority. All candidates will maintain communication discipline or remove themselves from my exercise immediately. Personal issues will be addressed on the surface, not during operational training. When they surfaced, Patterson called all three candidates aside for what military personnel euphemistically call a counseling session. His message was clear and non-negotiable. Gentlemen and lady, you are training to become members of the most elite fighting force in the world. In that capacity, you will operate in small teams where your survival and mission success depends absolutely on your ability to trust and support your teammates. If you cannot put aside personal biases and work effectively together, you do not belong in this program. Patterson turned his attention specifically to Jackson. Petty Officer Jackson, your performance has been adequate, but your attitude has been problematic. You seem to be more concerned with who doesn't belong here than with proving that you do belong here. That mindset will get you and your teammates killed in the operational environment. Jackson's face reddened, but he maintained military bearing. Instructor Chief, I just don't think. I don't care what you think, Patterson interrupted. I care what you can do. And what you need to do is demonstrate that you can work effectively with any qualified candidate, regardless of your personal opinions about their suitability. If you cannot do that, you are free to ring the bell at any time. Sarah appreciated Thompson's support and Patterson's intervention, but she also understood that the underlying tension hadn't been resolved. Jackson's resentment might be temporarily suppressed, but it hadn't disappeared. She would need to continue proving herself every day, not just to the instructors, but to fellow candidates who were looking for any sign of weakness or special treatment. The remainder of second phase passed without major incidents, though Sarah could feel the constant scrutiny from multiple directions. She responded by pushing herself even harder, arriving early for training sessions, and staying late to practice skills that didn't come naturally. Her performance on written tests was consistently in the top 5%, and her practical skills were developing rapidly. But it was during third phase, the land warfare portion of training, that Sarah truly distinguished herself. The phase focused on weapons training, small unit tactics, and demolitions, skills that would form the foundation of SEAL operational capabilities. Sarah had always been a natural athlete, but she had never fired a weapon before joining the Navy. The transition from civilian to proficient marksman required thousands of repetitions and careful attention to fundamental techniques. While some candidates struggled with the precision and discipline required for accurate shooting, Sarah found that her years of athletic training had prepared her well for the mental focus and physical control necessary for marksmanship. Her scores on the rifle range were consistently among the highest in the class, and her improvement on pistol qualification was remarkable. More importantly, she demonstrated the kind of tactical thinking that instructors looked for in potential team leaders. During a live-fire exercise that simulated a hostage rescue scenario, Sarah's team was tasked with clearing a building while minimizing risk to simulated hostages. The exercise was designed to test decision-making under pressure, communication skills, and the ability to adapt to changing circumstances. Sarah was assigned the role of team leader for the exercise, a responsibility that rotated among all candidates to evaluate their leadership potential. She had prepared extensively for the scenario, studying floor plans and developing multiple contingency plans based on possible complications. When her team moved to the line of departure, Sarah felt a familiar sensation of complete focus and clarity. All the noise and distraction of training environment faded away, leaving only the mission and the team members who depended on her leadership. Remember, she said quietly to her teammates during the final brief, smooth is fast, and fast is smooth. We don't need to rush, but we need to be efficient and decisive. Communication is critical. If you see something, say something immediately. The exercise began with Sarah's team moving deliberately through the building, clearing each room using techniques they had practiced hundreds of times. But when they reached the second floor, they encountered an unexpected complication. One of the simulated hostages appeared to be rigged with an explosive device. This was the kind of scenario that separated good candidates from exceptional ones. The easy solution was to abort the mission and call for specialized explosive ordnance disposal personnel. But that choice would likely result in the death of all simulated hostages, making it an unacceptable option. Sarah made a decision that surprised everyone, including the observing instructors. Instead of proceeding with the original plan or aborting the mission, she split her team and assigned 2 members to maintain overwatch while she and one other candidate moved to assess the explosive device. Using skills she had learned in the demolitions portion of training, Sarah was able to determine that the device was a training simulator rather than an actual threat. She disarmed it quickly and efficiently, then proceeded with the hostage rescue according to the original plan. The entire exercise was completed in record time with no simulated casualties and all objectives achieved. During the after-action review, the senior instructor made a point that would stay with Sarah for the rest of her career. Candidate Martinez demonstrated the kind of adaptive thinking and calculated risk-taking that we look for in SEAL team leaders. She gathered information quickly, made a difficult decision under pressure, and executed that decision with confidence. That's exactly the kind of leadership we need in the operational environment. For the first time since arriving at BUD/S, Sarah felt like she truly belonged. The approval of the instructing staff was gratifying, but more important was the change she noticed in her fellow candidates. Even Jackson, who had been her harshest critic, seemed to regard her with something approaching respect. But her success also brought new challenges. As one of the top performers in the class, Sarah was assigned increasingly difficult leadership roles and held to even higher standards. The instructors made it clear that they expected exceptional performance from her in all areas, not just adequate completion of minimum requirements. The pressure was intense, but Sarah discovered that she thrived under that kind of scrutiny. The higher the stakes, the more focused and capable she became. It was as if all the years of preparation and all the doubts she had overcome had been leading to this moment when she could finally demonstrate her true capabilities. With 2 weeks remaining in third phase, Sarah stood in the same spot where she had first arrived at Coronado 6 months earlier. But everything had changed. The person looking out at the Pacific Ocean was fundamentally different from the 18-year-old girl who had left Millbrook with a duffel bag and a head full of dreams. She had discovered reservoirs of strength and determination that she never knew she possessed. She had learned to operate effectively in environments that would terrify most people. Most importantly, she had proven to herself and to everyone around her that her capabilities were not limited by other people's expectations or assumptions. But the most significant test still lay ahead. Graduation from BUD/S would make her a SEAL, but it wouldn't make her accepted by the broader special operations community. That acceptance would have to be earned through performance in the operational environment, where the standards were even higher and the consequences of failure were measured in lives rather than training scores. As Sarah prepared for the final phase of her transformation from civilian to naval special warfare operator, she thought about the tattoo that had started so many conversations back in Texas. The eagle soaring above the storm was no longer just an aspiration. It was becoming a reality. 3 years had passed since Sarah Martinez graduated from BUD/S as part of the smallest class in recent memory. Only 11 candidates from the original 162 had earned their SEAL Trident. She had completed advanced training in combat medicine, advanced diving operations, and small unit leadership. She had deployed twice to different theaters of operation, proving herself in environments where theory met reality and where mistakes had consequences that extended far beyond training scores. Now she was back at Coronado, not as a student but as an instructor preparing for her most challenging assignment yet. At 21, she was the youngest person ever assigned to the BUD/S instructing staff, and one of only 3 women in the history of naval special warfare to achieve that position. The assignment had not come without controversy. Some senior leaders questioned whether someone so young and with relatively limited operational experience should be placed in such a visible and influential role. Others argued that her unique perspective and proven abilities made her exactly the kind of instructor the program needed as it continued to evolve. Captain Rebecca Torres, the commanding officer of the Naval Special Warfare Center, had personally selected Sarah for the position despite the objections from some quarters. Torres was herself a trailblazer, having become the first woman to command a special warfare training facility after a distinguished career in naval intelligence and special operations planning. Martinez, Torres had said during their initial meeting, "You're not here because you're a woman, and you're not here despite being a woman. You're here because you've demonstrated exceptional performance as both an operator and a leader. But I won't lie to you. Your presence will be scrutinized more closely than any instructor who has come before you. Every decision you make, every candidate you evaluate, every word you speak will be analyzed for evidence of bias or favoritism." Sarah had accepted the challenge with the same determination that had carried her through BUD/S. She understood that her role extended beyond simply training new SEALs. She was helping to establish precedents that would affect the program for decades to come. Her first class as an instructor included 127 candidates, among them the usual mix of Navy personnel, Marines, and other military members seeking to join the special operations community. What made this class unique was the presence of 7 women, the largest number ever to attempt BUD/S simultaneously. One of those women was Petty Officer Angela Rivera, a naval intelligence specialist from Los Angeles whose background was remarkably similar to Sarah's own. Rivera had faced skepticism and mockery from civilian friends and family members who couldn't understand her desire to pursue such an extreme career path. She had arrived at Coronado with the same combination of determination and uncertainty that Sarah remembered from her own first day. During the initial physical screening test, Sarah watched Rivera complete the minimum standards with room to spare, but she also noticed subtle signs of hesitation and self-doubt that could become problematic as training intensified. "Rivera," Sarah called out after the completion of the screening. "Walk with me." They moved away from the main group, giving Sarah an opportunity to speak privately with the young candidate. "How are you feeling about starting training?" Sarah asked. Rivera's response was carefully measured, the kind of answer that revealed as much in what it didn't say as in what it did. "I'm ready, Instructor Chief Martinez. I've prepared extensively, and I understand what's expected." Sarah smiled at the formal response. "That's exactly what I would have said 3 years ago. But what I was really thinking was that I hoped I belonged here, and that I wouldn't embarrass myself by failing publicly." Sound familiar? Rivera's composure cracked slightly, revealing the uncertainty underneath. "Yes, Instructor Chief. I keep wondering if I'm kidding myself about what I can actually handle." "Good," Sarah replied, surprising Rivera with the response. The people who worry about their capabilities are usually the ones who push themselves hard enough to develop those capabilities. The people who show up here absolutely certain they'll succeed are often the first ones to ring the bell when reality doesn't match their expectations. Over the following weeks, Sarah found herself in the unique position of being both mentor and evaluator to Rivera and the other female candidates. She was careful to maintain the same standards for everyone regardless of gender, but she also understood the additional psychological pressures that women faced in the program. The dynamic was complicated by the presence of several male candidates who had openly expressed skepticism about women's suitability for special operations. Unlike Jackson, who had simply been vocal about his prejudices, these candidates were more subtle in their resistance, creating an atmosphere of tension without providing clear opportunities for intervention. The situation came to a head during the 4th week of training, traditionally one of the most challenging periods as instructors ramp up the physical and mental pressure in preparation for Hell Week. Sarah was leading a conditioning run on the beach when she noticed that one of the female candidates, Petty Officer Chun, was struggling to maintain the pace. Chun had been performing well in other areas, but her running times were consistently at the bottom of the class, making her vulnerable to elimination if she couldn't improve quickly. As the formation moved along the beach, Sarah heard candidate Morrison, a Marine from North Carolina who shared a name with, but no relation to her old tormentor from the diner, make a comment to his running partner. "Looks like Chin's going to hold us all back again. Maybe if she spent less time trying to prove she belongs here, and more time actually training, she'd be able to keep up." The comment was carefully crafted to sound like legitimate performance criticism while containing an undertone of gender-based dismissal. Sarah had to make a quick decision about how to respond without either ignoring problematic behavior or appearing to show favoritism. She increased her pace and moved to run alongside Morrison, matching his stride and speaking quietly enough that only he could hear her words. "Morrison, I've been watching Chin's performance across all evolutions, not just running. Her scores on the obstacle course are in the top 15%, her swimming times are consistently strong, and her performance on written examinations is exemplary. Every candidate has areas where they need improvement. What I'm concerned about is candidates who focus more on other people's weaknesses than on their own development." Morrison's pace faltered slightly as he processed the implication of Sarah's words. "Instructor Chief, I'm just concerned about team standards." "No, you're concerned about your own insecurities," Sarah replied bluntly. "And you're expressing those insecurities in a way that undermines unit cohesion and reveals weaknesses in your own character. In the operational environment, that kind of attitude will get people killed." The conversation continued after the run during a counseling session that included Morrison, Chun, and Sarah. The session was designed to address the performance issues while also establishing clear expectations about professional behavior and mutual support among candidates. "Chun, your running times need improvement, and we both know it," Sarah began. "But improvement requires focused effort, not excuses. Morrison, your job as a teammate is to help Chun succeed, not to provide commentary on her struggles. If you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem." Chin's improvement over the following weeks was dramatic, driven partly by additional training, but mostly by the kind of determination that emerges when someone refuses to let others' doubts become their reality. Morrison also adjusted his attitude, perhaps recognizing that his own performance was being evaluated not just on individual metrics, but on his ability to function as part of a team. The changes in class dynamics were noticed by other instructors, particularly Chief Patterson, who had become something of a mentor to Sarah during her transition to the instructing staff. "You handled that situation well," Patterson told her during a brief break between training evolutions. "You addressed the performance issue and the attitude problem simultaneously, without creating the impression that female candidates receive different treatment. That's exactly the kind of leadership we need in this program." Hell Week for Sarah's first class as an instructor was a revelation in many ways. Watching candidates face the same challenges that had nearly broken her 3 years earlier gave her new perspective on her own journey and on the nature of human potential under extreme stress. Rivera not only survived Hell Week, but emerged as one of the strongest performers in the class. Her transformation from uncertain candidate to confident operator was remarkable to witness, and Sarah felt a deep sense of pride in having played a role in that development. Chen also successfully completed Hell Week, her improved running times having given her the confidence needed to push through the most challenging phase of training. Morrison finished as well, and his attitude toward his female classmates had evolved significantly from his early skepticism to genuine respect. But the most significant moment came during the final phase of training, when Sarah was observing a tactical exercise designed to test leadership under pressure. Rivera was serving as team leader for a complex scenario that required rapid decision-making and efficient communication under simulated combat conditions. As Sarah watched Rivera direct her team through the exercise with the same kind of calm competence she had once demonstrated herself, she felt a profound sense of completion. The young woman from Los Angeles was displaying exactly the kind of leadership that the SEAL community needed, and she was doing it in a way that made gender irrelevant to the outcome. After the exercise, as the candidates were conducting their after-action review, Sarah noticed a familiar figure observing from the edge of the training area. Captain Torres approached with someone Sarah didn't recognize, a woman in Navy dress uniform wearing the insignia of a full commander. "Instructor Chief Martinez," Torres called out. "I'd like you to meet Commander Jessica Hayes. She's here from Naval Special Warfare Command to observe the training and evaluate some potential program modifications." Sarah came to attention and rendered the appropriate honors, but she was curious about the nature of Commander Hayes' visit. High-ranking officers didn't usually observe routine training exercises without specific reasons. Commander Hayes studied Sarah with the kind of intense attention that made her feel like she was being evaluated for something beyond her current assignment. "Instructor Chief Martinez," Hayes began, "I've been reviewing your performance reports and the feedback from candidates in your classes. Your impact on this program has been remarkable in a very short period of time. I'm here to discuss an opportunity that might interest you." Hayes explained that Naval Special Warfare Command was developing a new training program designed to prepare special operations personnel for the evolving nature of modern warfare. The program would focus on unconventional threats, cultural awareness, and the kind of complex problem-solving skills needed in environments where traditional military solutions were inadequate. "We need someone to lead this program who understands both the tactical requirements of special operations and the importance of diverse perspectives in complex situations. Your background and demonstrated abilities make you an ideal candidate for this position. But I have to warn you, it would mean leaving the instructing position here just as you're beginning to establish yourself." Sarah felt a familiar sensation, the same mixture of excitement and uncertainty that had accompanied every major decision in her military career. The opportunity Hayes was describing represented a chance to influence the future direction of special operations training on a much larger scale than her current position allowed. "Ma'am, can you give me more details about the nature of this program and the timeline for implementation?" Hayes smiled, apparently pleased by Sarah's focus on specifics rather than immediate acceptance or rejection of the offer. "The program is designed to address the reality that modern special operations often involve working with diverse populations in culturally complex environments. We need operators who can think beyond traditional military solutions and who can build effective relationships with local partners who may have very different perspectives and approaches." As Hayes continued her explanation, Sarah realized that her own journey from small-town Texas to Naval Special Warfare Operator had given her exactly the kind of perspective the program needed. She had learned to navigate environments where she was different from everyone around her, and she had developed the ability to prove herself through performance rather than through conformity to existing expectations. The conversation continued for another hour, covering the details of the proposed program and the leadership challenges it would involve. By the time Commander Hayes departed, Sarah had accepted the position, though she would finish training her current class before transitioning to the new assignment. That evening, Sarah stood on the beach at Coronado watching the sunset paint the Pacific in brilliant oranges and purples. She thought about the journey that had brought her from serving coffee to people who doubted her dreams to a position where she could shape the future of elite military training. Her tattoo, now faded slightly after 3 years of military service, still carried the same meaning it had when she first got it. The eagle soaring above the storm was no longer just an aspiration or even an achievement. It had become a way of life. She thought about Rivera and Chun and all the other candidates who would follow in her footsteps, each facing their own version of the challenges she had overcome. The program she was about to lead would help prepare them not just for the physical and tactical demands of special operations, but for the complex human challenges that define modern warfare. As she turned to walk back toward the base, Sarah smiled at the irony of her situation. 3 years ago, she had been fighting for the right to be accepted as a capable operator. Now she was being asked to lead a program that would help others navigate similar challenges while serving at the highest levels of military specialization. The girl who had been mocked for her tattoo in a small Texas diner had become a woman whose expertise was sought by the highest levels of naval command. But, more importantly, she had become someone who could help others discover their own capacity for extraordinary achievement. Tomorrow, she would continue training the next generation of naval special warfare operators. And, someday soon, she would take on an even greater challenge, preparing those operators for a world where strength alone was not enough, where success required the kind of wisdom that could only come from understanding what it meant to soar above the storm while never forgetting what it felt like to fight through it. The eagle had learned to fly, and now it was time to teach others how to find their own wings.